or we could describe discriminate as unfair treatment. A new comprehensive study finds evidence that strict voting laws do suppress the ballot along racial lines. This is by Van R. Newkirk II, and it was written February 18th, 2017. And here we can see someone, ID and some sort of form. All right. The catch-22, or a paradox, or something that's contradictory, of course, is that the laws have to be passed and solidly in place first to have a large effect on data, which in this case would mean potentially discriminatory effects would have already impacted elections. A new study from researchers at the University of California, San Diego, is one of the first to analyze certified votes across all states after the implementation of voter laws in multiple elections, and it found just that kind of racially discriminatory impact. Specifically, they found that strict photo identification laws have a differentially negative impact on the turnout of Hispanics, Blacks, and mixed-race Americans in primaries and general elections, so anytime people go to vote. The authors note that the existing research tends to point to three things. One, that strict voter ID laws requiring identification to cast a ballot do, in fact, reduce turnout by some amount. Two, that turnout reduction tends to work in Republicans' favor. And three, and that differential effects have been observed along class and education lines, but not race. According to the new study, the new approach addresses these problems by assessing or measuring nationwide votes in the 2008 and 2012 primary and general elections using responses from the Cooperative Congressional Election Studies, which is a large national survey that validates self-attestation or self-verified of voting status with voting records. The researchers use this data set to compare turnout in elections where strict voter ID had been implemented versus those where it hadn't, and measured the gap in turnout between the races. So in states where there were voter ID restrictions and states where there weren't, they measured the difference between the two. Using this refined methodology, researchers found that strict ID laws doubled the turnout gap between whites and Latinos in the general elections and almost doubled the white-black turnout gap in primary elections. So that means that 2 times, that there's a huge gap between who's voting, that more white people are voting in both of these instances. And given their turnout models incorporate the known surge of turnout among minorities spurred by Barack Obama's candidacy, they might have actually been underestimating the overall suppression effects of voter ID law, which means that a lot of, there was a very large turnout in voting when Barack Obama ran for president, and that could actually have skewed the data because more minorities voted. So there could actually be more suppression had it not been Barack Obama. I couldn't find a compelling way to control for the potential Obama effect, and I do think his presence might have reduced the effect of voter ID laws in 2008 and 2012. And that's Dr. Hodgenall from University of California at San Diego, who's a researcher there, said in an email. Although in order for that to happen, Obama's effect on minority turnout would have to be especially pronounced in strict ID law states. In an article in the Washington Post summarizing their research, the authors expound or talk about on the political conclusions of their work. By instituting strict voter ID laws, states can alter the electorate or people who are entitled to vote and shift outcomes towards those on the right or the Republican or conservative. Where these laws are enacted, the influence of Democrats and liberals wanes or gets smaller, and the power of Republicans grows. Unsurprisingly, these strict ID laws are passed almost exclusively by Republican legislatures, Republican lawmakers. Alone, those political effects might not matter. Existing legal precedent, or something that's like an example or a guide, what's already happened, So what's already happened has allowed voting laws that have limited political party advantage so long as they do not violate anti-discrimination laws as outlined in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So far, the intent or purpose and proven racial disparities or differences in access to ID have been the strongest arguments against implementing strict ID laws. Think back to Alabama or the black belt that we learned about, and have worked in court in some limited and egregious or horrible bad cases. But the University of California at San Diego study provides some of the first comprehensive or complete evidence of the racially different impact of voter ID laws on voting outcomes, and adds to the growing body of data that voter suppression, or the blocking and stopping, is the end result of several Republican-led voting initiatives and contributes to their national partisan advantage, to their national party advantage. Again, the catch-22, or the paradox, or the contradiction, is that if data does continue to accumulate, so if we do continue to see that voter ID laws continue to keep minorities or older people or poor people from voting, then the effect of this discrimination will have already taken place. So it's like we'll only see the result of it after it happens. And then this is just a picture of the author who works for The Atlantic, and this is a direct link as this was an adapted version of this article.